Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everybody to this Ifan webinar looking at the importance of standards to business and getting involved with standardization. This morning we've got a panel comprising myself, who's doing the introductions, Andrea Bedard-Smith. I am chair of the British Standards Society and Ifan secretary, and also chair of the Ifan European Group. But my background is in standards information in the construction industry. I'm going to be handing over shortly to our moderator, Keith Wilson. Keith is Ifan treasurer, vice chair of the British Standards Society, and standards information professional. Also on the call today, we have Laurent Oberlé, who is president of ACANOR, the French Standards Users Group. He is chair of the Ifan Working Group on Education and Training and is a consultant for Soccermec, a global company delivering innovative power solutions. We also have Tuvia Liberman, who is CTO of Teldor Cables and Systems Limited and Teldor Cables Telecom Limited, which manufacture a wide range of wires and cables for telecommunications, electronics, and electricity. He is also leader in the design and production of high data rate copper and optical LAN cables. Tuvia participates in a number of IEC technical committees and is in the cabling sector as well as on national committees of the Standards Institution of Israel. Ross Raitt is Ifan president, chair of the Ifan Working Group on Conformity. Ross was ISO Vice President Technical and Chair of the ISO Technical Management Board and is CEO of the Standards Group. Ross's background is in the financial sector. And lastly, we have Terry Hill, CBE. Terry is a business leader in the technology sector, was Chair of the Arup Group for 10 years, then Chair of the Arup Group Trustees. After another role includes member of the Nuclear Industry Council, Chair of the Independent Transport Commission, and Chair of the Infrastructure UK Committee on specifying successful standards. He was also ISO President from 2013 to 2014. Terry's background is in the built environment. So welcome, and I'll now hand over to our moderator for today, Keith Wilson. Keith.
Thank you, Andrea, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. And thank you for participating in today's webinar. We have 4 presenters, as Andrea has mentioned. And so without further ado, can I ask you, Ross, to start us off with your presentation and thoughts, please?
Well, good morning, good afternoon, or as we say in Australia, good day. It covers all of the above. So we know standards are important to business, don't we? Well, a few years ago, this is a true story, I met with the new minister in the Australian government who told me that standards were a drain on the economy and he thought we should get rid of them. Whoa, I said. And I told him a story. Standards in the financial services sector facilitate global commerce, allowing fast, easy, secure payments at the speed of light, from the outback in Australia to the New York stock markets. Let me explain how. So, Minister, do you have any cash on you? Did you buy coffee this morning? The Minister replied, well, no, I don't have any cash. And yes, I did buy coffee this morning using the app on my smartphone. So, Minister, how do you think that happens? Sheepishly, he looked at me and said, standards. Yes, Minister, standards are the hidden architecture that makes almost everything work. So like in the Grease movie song, he said, tell me more, tell me more. So, Minister, the International Organisation for Standardization, ISO, engineer with 165 national members, like Standards Australia here, has a technical committee, TC 68, and in collaboration with other technical committees and numerous other organisations, develops the standards necessary to facilitate the global financial services industry. It is responsible for core banking, capital markets, including asset management, including your pension fund, Minister, payments, your coffee, Minister, credit card processing, and information security relevant to the financial sector. Just consider the interfaces and security requirements to facilitate the trillions of dollars of transactions that take place every day on a global scale. Well, here are just a few of the standards that TC68 works on. Banking, telecommunications and messages, the Business Identification Code, or BIC, standards for securities and related financial instruments, codes for exchanges and market identification, MIC, International Bank Account Number, or IBAN, and business identifier codes such as BIC and SWIFT. It is complicated, so TC68, through its Chair Advisory Group, facilitates coordination with other ISO committees, such as ISO TC 46 on information and documentation, ISO IEC, the Joint Technical Committee 1 on information technology, ISO TC 322 on sustainable finance, ISO TC 251 asset management. It also liaises with the fintech industry and has a fintech advisory group. A standards advisory group to also liaise with the global regulatory community, and so on. And of course, a relatively new technical committee, TC 307, on blockchain and distributed ledger technologies. Now, these are important because they represent thousands of global experts and users of standards from all sectors, business, regulators, consumers, and ensure that innovation and changes in technologies and service, particularly your smartphone's power and capability, all work and are secure and meet the expectations of the regulatory sector and users. An often overlooked feature is that standards are maintained and new ones developed to facilitate new security and resilience requirements. Innovations such as blockchain and supply chain finance are a good example. As a government minister, this global expert business-driven technical resource is invaluable, and it is important that governments are involved and participate. These services are all provided and funded largely by the employers of these experts through not-for-profit international NGOs such as ISO. So why do they do this? In short, Minister, it's good for society, it's good for business, and exceptionally good for governments. TC68 has a very good website where you can find out more and track their extensive programs. You can also follow the Ifan newsletter for information on the vast array of work that ISO and its collaborators are working on. ISO IEC Joint Technical Committee 1, JTC 1 for Information Technology, has another excellent website. And of course, there are many other standards that cover numerous other topics, Minister. For example, TC 67 for oil and gas. And ISO's partner, the IEC, the International Metro Technical Commission for Electronic Technologies. And closer to home, the ISO and IEC member Standards Australia, who holds the ISO Secretariat 307 for blockchain. The Minister looked at me and he said, "So, Ross, thank you for that. Let me ISO you a coffee. No doubt the payment will connect to my bank and the parliamentary coffee shop, one also, and all before the coffee is made." I looked at the Minister and said, "So, are you flying today, Minister?" "Well, yes," he said. "I guess there are standards for the aerospace sector too." I said, "Yes, Minister." And so the Minister went off happy in the knowledge that surrounding everything that he was doing was this incredible global technical effort to make things work. And in particular, the lesson today was the importance of international standards to the financial services sector. Thank you.
Great start. Thanks, Ross. Lots of takeaways in there for us. Thank you. I've just noted three. I really like the idea that standards are the hidden architecture of global trade. I think that's just a very elegant summing up of standards. Making everyday transactions that we all need work reliably. We just take all of that for granted. And the effort behind making that happen and ensuring innovations are taken up and maintained and improved. Sometimes we forget the role of standards, don't we, in the part that innovation plays in making our world better. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move straight on now to Laurent. So over to you, Laurent.
Hello, everybody. I am happy to take part to this event. And I will say some things about my company, I suppose. First of that, Socomec is a 100-year-old family-owned which delivers innovative and power solutions. The group impedance is ensured by the family. We have 3.6 thousand of employees, 12 manufacturing sites, and over 28 subsidiaries. And Socomec specialty is providing low voltage energy installation from the equipment to the monitoring, where the energy is critical, robust, and ultra reliable solutions for building like data centers, solar plants, utilities, and hospital. And so we are a player in this electrical field, which is well known, recognized. And therefore, we are very active in standardization for following a reason, because our management considers the participation to the standardization is strategic for following reasons. Clearly to identify and to influence the market rules, facilitate regulatory compliance assessment, promote compliance with the recent standards, our solution among stakeholders, in particular among our customer and specifiers. Also, active and influencing participation in normative work allow us to know and to anticipate future development of our products, solution, and associate services in the face of competitors who do not actively participate. And more globally, enrich its networking through standardization meeting in terms of new business partners, laboratories, certifiers, competitors. Socomec has participated in more than 40 years in standardization work through, at first, professional trade association, and after directly in standardization organization, in order to influence the product standards mainly and some installation standards. The setting of the objectives or even the lead of participation is generally comes from the marketing, which will give the targets to the other people of the standardization team, like people from the development or people from the testing laboratories. The delicate choices for our standardization representative is generally lead to or is depending from the personality, the skills, and to say a certain experience and flair to be competent and to know how to tackle the meetings. Of course, it's not possible to imagine to stop to participate in standardization work, because in this case we will lose the turnover, and after 2 or 3 years we will lose the markets. Yes, that was my point. If you have question, I can comment it, of course.
Great, thank you, Laurent. Very interesting background to the business as well. You explained, I think, really clearly the role of standards in a business, particularly in a business that's had a long and successful history, and it's 40 years of active participation in standards and what that brings to the business, but also to the wider industry. I think that came over. Assurance with customers about the products that the business sells, particularly in a global market, an influence that taking part in standards brings, and the development that brings of the people in the business and the benefit that brings to the business. So thank you very much indeed for that. I'm going to now move on to our third presenter. Our third presenter is Terry Hill. So over to you, Terry.
Okay, here we go. So I haven't got a presentation. I don't know if anybody was expected to have a presentation, but I'm going to try something radical. I don't know if anybody can, if anybody, you don't need to read it, but I don't know if you can see a sort of diagram there. Gets the idea that it's a sort of a Venn diagram. It's an overlapping set, and that is an overlapping set for the railway industry. Of all the standards that apply for railways, things have changed since I did this report, but it showed some of the challenges we had, in that there were in total a possibility of 22 overlapping occasions when there was maybe some ambiguity, certainly some confusion, certainly complexity as to what standards need to apply. And I need to try and position standards here. Of course, we all know that standards are a voluntary enterprise for people to come together to actually get the best and the most efficient way out of products and services, and my background is in the built environment, roads, railways, bridges, tunnels. At one extreme, the civil engineering; at the other extreme, a system of systems that is a railway, an airport, or whatever. And I was asked to do some work quite a while ago now, because there was an allegation that we found to be completely true. And that is probably construction is one of the last major sectors to fully feel the impact of new and high technologies. The level of R&D spent in infrastructure is the lowest of all economics sectors. And so somebody, not me, had done some work that said, I don't know why it was this precise number, that it was 22% more costly than it needed to be. I can't remember how they came up to that number, but anyway, there were cost savings to be made if only we could get some efficiencies into this. And one of the and there were lots of different recommendations, but one of them was to look at how standards incentivized innovation in the infrastructure sector. So then I went on to lead this inquiry that ended up with a report called Specifying Successful Standards, because, as I say, standards fit in this overall landscape of designs, specifications, standards, and contracts, and how they get applied. And as I say, in the railway industry, we found that there was this whole set of standards that applied, and I mean, you would have thought, I might have thought, that if you got lots and lots of standards that you could use, you know, there are international standards, there were European standards, there were UK standards, there were company standards, there were standards in the different subsectors. And you would have thought, well, actually, if they're overlapping, you could actually just choose what is the easiest to find your way through this labyrinth, and cut corners and get things cheaper. And in fact, it was the opposite. What actually happened is that where the standards and specifications overlapping on each other, then as you went from one to the other, each time you applied a new layer, the costs went up, the complexity went up, the time, the risk, all of them went up each time. Now, to cut to the other end, there was a lot of success in what happened afterwards, because there was, for a brief time, a drive to simplify the standards. And in those days, you measured standards by the number of pages in them all. And I remember London Underground went the way through, clearing out where there was duplication, and they cut the volume of standards by page count by 50%, just by looking through this. I remember when I was doing this, as Andrea said, I was for a while president of ISO. In the lead up to that, whilst I was, if you like, being considered for this post as president, I got together with quite a few luminaries. And anyway, there was a very nice dinner I remember I went to, when I was sat between the head of the US standards, Joe Bartia, and the head of German standards, DIN, Torsten Bach. And I sat between them. And I always think that if you're given a difficult task to do, somebody will have done it before. So I was being asked to conduct this review about how standards were specified, how standards were prepared in there. And I said, and the fact that there was a lot of duplication. And the man from the US said, what are you talking about? There's no problem here. The market decides. There may be lots and lots of standards. In the US, there's lots of standards organizations. And the power of the free market will decide which standards are adopted, which ones are. Whereupon my friend to the right from DIN, he sort of said, no. In Germany, it is totally efficient. All of our standards meet with exceptional precision. And so then I realized that actually, as I said from the beginning, you have to realize that standards fit within the marketplace, fit within the whole range in which products and services are specified. And indeed, there's a whole range to choose from about where you position. There isn't just one solution for doing this. So to get to what we did about this time when we conducted it, and Andrea was very much involved with this, because we actually got a really fascinating team of people together, from clients, highway authorities, railway infrastructure operators. We got material suppliers. We got designers. We got builders, contractors, and we got the civil servants in central government and people from standards as well. And we worked all the way through it. And I thought that we were going to come up with something sort of hard hitting. It did come out hard hitting, but actually, what it talked about, and I was absolutely fascinated, the results we came up with how can we be more intelligent in how standards and specifications are applied. There are some fantastic stories that came out of it. with one set of standards for asphalt, for tarmac, for laying roads, which were quite succinct, actually. There wasn't that much wrong with the standards for asphalt. We went to this quarry in the Midlands, and they had to have 270 separate mixes because each authority specified them differently. The standards, as I say, were quite succinct, but actually they were being applied through the specifications in so many different ways. And as I said, the market, right, they had 270 different mixes according to whether it was going to this local authority, that highway authority, where it was going. And so my surprise was how much of this effort came back to the clients about how they started specifying standards. One of the key things that we, you don't realize that actually, if you get this wrong, the people who suffer are usually, well, you might actually say society in the end suffers, but the people in the middle are the SMEs. Big organizations like Arup, we can operate in it. We've got clever people. We can work in any jurisdiction around the world. That's what we do. We don't have a common set of standards for Arup. We actually work in whatever market. The people who suffer are SMEs. And so just imagine the difficulty for an SME who has to then, I'm trying to find the quote where it was. It says here, we should ban specifications using such expressions as all relevant standards shall apply. Because, you know, now, again, a company like Arup, we know what's going on, we can work it all out. But actually, small companies will have a great deal of difficulty knowing what on earth that means. And so we should actually be far crisper in saying whatever it is that we should. So we came up with this notion in the specifications and standards of using a RAG approach. How do we incentivize innovation? So within that, then the red, amber, green. What is it under the red categories that is absolutely mandatory? And of course, it will vary from sector to sector. I guess in the nuclear sector, there's an awful lot which will be red in that RAG rating. Whereas at other ends, in things like house building and so on, there should be far more discretion. So mandatory. Amber is a category that's in the middle that actually, quite honestly, we'd like to see a lot more of, which is mandatory / advisory, but is open and subject to derogation. Where actually, if people come up with different ways of going about things, then in fact, it is possible to derogate. And it's interesting what happens when these recommendations, again, London Underground really took it under their wings as to what this meant. They have a system that if they find any particular standard has 10 derogations, I don't know, over a period of time, a year or two or something, 10 derogations, then that standard is called in for review. What is going on here? What are the things that we can learn? And then green is open to challenge. In fact, you expect challenge and incentivize challenge to aid innovation and efficiency. Now, I've been asked many times, what do we think the proportion is? If you actually look at a suite of documents or a standard or a standards and specification, you know, where should the balance between red, amber, green? Of course, I would like to say more should be open to challenge and innovation, so we can look at that. But I do accept that in many sectors, particularly at the safety angles of things, that there may be more which is in the mandatory part. And mandatory, let's be clear, you might think it's a bad thing. Mandatory is easy, makes life much easier for the smaller suppliers, the smaller organizations, because they actually just know if you just follow this standard, bang, 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 then it will be acceptable. So just a further end.
Oh, thank you.
That's where I'll end. think about how standards can be open to derogation and how does that derogation work all the way through. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you, Terry. Lots of takeaways in there as well. Thank you for looking at it from a different point of view, which I think is really refreshing, and quite a lot of learning points in there as well. I've picked out 4 just before we move on. One is a theme which has come through from our other presentations as well, and this is the role of standards as an incentive to innovation. I think that's pretty clear now from those presentations. You mentioned standards in effect as a catalyst for industries to take up new technologies, and that's something also that has come through as well. And relationships between design specifications, standards and contracts and their application. It's not just that those documents exist, but it's how organizations and individuals then apply them. And that standards should be an economical way of communicating complex matters. Then the word economical is not just about cost, but also about, for example, precision of content. So yes, lots of takeaways in there. So thank you for that. And now to Tuvia. So over to you, please.
Thank you, Keith. Thanks for passing on the conch. I want to thank Ifan for hosting the event and inviting me. It's an honor. As mentioned earlier, I came to you through the Standards Institute of Israel, and my company, Teldor, which designs and manufactures literally thousands of different cables, from high-tech fiber optics to instrumentation and electronics, etc. And we're an international corporation. So about 30 years ago, we were one of those SMEs that Terry was talking about that suffered. And we decided that in addition just to be a consumer of standards, it would be in our interest on a strategic level to also influence either new or updated standards, etc. So about 30 years ago, we actually explored the level of involvement from the strategic level, and we've been doing it since then. I mean, most of our activities are geared to the high end, and therefore we have customers, end customers or distributors, whoever, who are designed to, or as a principle and a policy, are willing to pay for quality products or high-end products, meaning products that meet the standards. It's to their advantage and it's to our advantage. And so we had the two hats of both a consumer of standards and someone who wanted to try and influence it. Now, you would ask, what are the reasons that we're doing it? But apparently, and I've never met Laurent before, but apparently we are esprit apparenté, or kindred spirits, because his list that he mentioned was exactly one-to-one our list that we basically put together and have been amending it over the past 30 years. So Laurent, merci bien. You saved me some time. Exactly the same list.
You're welcome.
Okay. But we, as I mentioned, because we're international, we looked, starting from the level, first of all, what are the issues that will help our both business development, in other words, from the two levels, from a positive area, and also reduce barriers to trade, internationally especially, excuse me. And from that point of view, we first analyze the issues that we want to be involved in. Then we looked at the relative organizations or relevant organizations, and only finally do we decide on the particular bodies, technical committees, subcommittees, working groups, organizations, etc. So based on our experience, we participate in varying levels of standardization activities. First of all, on the active or protocol levels, we're active in the IEEE, the Ethernet standards, for those of you who are interested, the 802.3. We're active also in ISO IC. Those are the passive cabling systems where our cables participate in, but I come from the engineering side, and we obviously have to know where our particular products participate in and are part of a system. And we're also trying to influence there. And I would say the bulk of our work in terms of hours, dedication, management, attention is on the component sides, because we manufacture, design, sell cables as cables, which are components. And we're very active in the IC. on that level, both on our copper-based cables and our fiber optic cables. Now, we normally try and do our activities depending on the relevance. We decide the level of participation. In some particular projects, we are project leaders and editors of the standards themselves. Teldor very disproportionately from an SME is responsible right now in the different organizations of literally tens of international and national standards that we either are responsible as project leaders or as editors. The next level, of course, is to collaborate, being part of a correspondence group or a project team on the standards. Sometimes we just want to influence, making sure that the entry level, we all know standards are voluntary and they create the minimum entry level, that the entry level is at the level that we want, and therefore we collaborate or we're part of the general approach. And I would say on the weakest or lowest level, I call it advanced knowledge or being in the know. If we, through our participation, are fully aware of the drafts of the new standards and where things are going, it's both an advantage for us to have products that are ready for the market the moment that the standards are announced and become public. And secondly, we provide our customers with that pre-knowledge, how to get themselves done. I can give you an example on the European level. Before the ROSE directive came out, two things happened. Because we were in the know in advance, we had the advantage not only to totally convert our factory to 100% ROSE compliant, but we did it half a year in advance before it came in so that we could enable all of our distributors to have fully ROSE compliant products in their warehouses by the time the directive came in force. So here's an example of just the advantage of being in the know before the general public does. The final thing I'd like to say is we also work on a full circle policy. I mentioned that we do both national or domestic markets and international. Most of the standards in our area are voluntary, are not mandatory. They don't have to do with safety issues, etc. And so the normal tactic that we do is first and foremost, we are active either as the leading or collaborating on an international standard. Once it reaches a level of stability, generally FDIS in our circles, or some similar stable level of technology, then we start the process nationally, domestic or the Israel Standards Institute. And the reason is because of our local laws and regulations, even though an international standard exists, the local market can only be required to adhere to it if it has a local equivalent. So we normally adopt an international standard and it's written into a law, or it's written into an edict or some sort of local code. And so basically our work is we start the work off internationally and we finish up full circle domestically. So we're covered in our export markets and our domestic markets as well. There we go. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tuvia. Again, really lots to get to think about, and some really great examples there. I've just made a note of 4 takeaways. There are recurring themes again. However, there were some new points that you raised in there. I think the example you gave of your company of an SME growing with the help of standards, with a strategic participation in the standards world, and how a company has collaborated within that standards world was very interesting. The point you made about customers paying for quality products if they could be reassured of the value of those products, and there's a debate to be had about what we mean by value, but I think that was also pretty clear from the examples you gave. The role of standards in helping to reduce barriers to trade, and a reminder to us, I think, that participation in the standards world it can be across a number of levels. And you mentioned products, components, and systems, and I think that sums that up very, very elegantly. So thank you very much, and once again, thank you to all of our participants today for those presentations. I have time probably for a couple of questions. The first one is, what is the main reason that your organization is or has been and is involved in standardization? And I'm going to go first of all to Laurent, if you could give us some thoughts on that question, Laurent.
Yes, thank you, Keith, to give me the floor. I think it's very easy to answer this question. We are on strategic markets in my company. And in fact, if you don't follow the rules like standards, you are out of the market. For instance, we are a big worldwide player for UPS. And if the standards of UPS, the product standards change, in fact, you cannot continue to sell the product because it is not compliant with. And only following or buying the standards is not the solution because, as somebody says just before, in fact, you have to anticipate. And if you are active in standardization, you can, before the others, know 2 years before, approximately, what will come. And so you can organize the research and development department according the new standards which will come.
Indeed, thank you. Any further thoughts on that, Terry?
Yeah, you probably don't realise how fundamental that question is, because I think there's some difficult. I mean, Arup is involved in standardization. If you like, it's a push me pull you thing. There are new technologies coming along where eventually, when it gets mature enough, we want to start setting up standards, and also we want to be in there because we will have the experts. On the other hand, sometimes we find standards getting in the way because so we want to be in there as part of the standards writing, so and we're out in the marketplace and we're knowing what's coming along. But actually, there's a much broader question, and that is: are all of the stakeholders represented in standards setting? And the big area that's I was once on. This just came out of nowhere. I was once being interviewed on Russian television when I was president of ISO, with a particularly aggressive interviewer. He said, "All you people from standards, it's just a cartel. It's just to make it inefficient so that you can charge higher rates for products and big business. It's just run by big business." And of course, I gave a robust response to that about society and so on. But it did get me thinking: do we really have the consumer pull strongly enough in standards organizations? Because you will get the suppliers, the manufacturers, the designers like us, but sometimes I think us at Arup, we should be trying to represent a society more rather than just. So I think, why do you get involved in standards? At one level, it's simple. It's to do with new technology, innovation, and making sure standards remain relevant. But I think there's a broader need as well, which is looking to the needs of society.
Okay, great. Thank you, Terry. Tuvia, any further thoughts?
Yeah, I can telegraphically list it in 3 ways. The most important thing is, as I said previously, business development. I think one of the shortest and best definition of marketing I ever heard is either bringing new products to existing customers or existing products to new customers. And standardization, from our point of view, enables both of those, which fully support business development. The second thing is it gives us a competitive advantage vis-a-vis our competitors who either are not as active as we are in standards or as knowledgeable or not there at all. And finally, there's a certain value to what we would call your image or your reputation or your branding in the market. So if people know that Teldor is active in writing international standards, they will ask us, they will come to our website as a default. They will ask our engineers to come and give seminars, etc., because they're aware of our standards knowledge and activities based on, you could say, the image of the branding.
Thank you. And Ross?
Look, in the finance sector, failure is just a disaster. If the money goes to the wrong place, or it doesn't get there, or it gets intercepted, the security breaches, then it's a disaster. Not only does it impact on the financial services sector, but of course it impacts on all of the customers in that chain. Whether it's the SME in the parliament that I talked about who was selling the coffee, or the minister who was trying to buy his coffee using his smartphone, who was at fault. So if these things don't connect, and I think this SME thing is very interesting. I think a few of you have touched on this, but how do we, there are millions and millions, billions probably of SMEs, and they tend to be standards takers, whatever they use. But to get ahead of the game, they need to be involved in what's coming through the pipe. And standardization, in my view, getting into one of these international committees, or even a national committee, with a whole range of experts in a particular field, probably from quite diverse companies and businesses, and sitting down and listening to that conversation is going to educate you and teach you so much that you'll be able to then potentially adapt your business, I think as Tuvi was saying, and be ahead of the curve for when the change comes. I know, for example, everybody's talking about, certainly in my circle anyway, blockchain. What is it? What is this distributed ledger system? It's up in the cloud. How does it actually work? Well, if you're a business, it's in your interest to find out, because it might be a huge competitive advantage if you can start to use this. And you don't want to be a taker. It's much better to be a maker, or at least a participant along the way.
Thank you. Now I'm going to hand back to Andrea, who's going to ask the last question of this webinar. So back to you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you, panelists, for a very interesting session. You've come up with excellent suggestions as to why it's very important for businesses to be involved in standardization. But I'd like to finish off by just asking you another question. Obviously, we've gone across why your businesses participate, but your businesses participate through an individual going to a technical committee and giving up quite a lot of their time and energy and knowledge to help develop standards. So I'd really like to ask you to tell me very quickly how you feel you have personally benefited from being involved in standardization, and perhaps how you might encourage others to. So I'd like to really kick off with you, Laurent, and ask you, how have you benefited, and what would you say to encourage perhaps young professionals to get involved?
Okay, thank you, Andrea. I would say that the individual benefits of participation in standardization is, in my opinion, mainly related to the development of the personality, of my own personality, because it's necessary to have a know-how how to relate people together, coming from other country, other culture, and especially when you become a leader of a working group. Of course, thanks my participation, I learned a lot about the local markets, about our competitors, about the stakeholders, including the organizations, the institutions, the authorities, the certifier, and so on. And at the end, I become more technical, more clever in how to handle the standardization work. And I think it's fully a component to be, as I was a marketing leader, it's very important to participate to standardization work.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you for a very good answer to that question. Tulia, could you add anything to what Laurent has said?
Yes, as traditionally, apparently, Laurent also says the same things I want to. But in addition, I would say just 3 bullet points. So first one is cross-pollination. When I come from the engineering side, and especially in the working groups and the technical committees, when you're meeting with engineers with a lot of experience from around the world, or people with good technical backgrounds in your field, the cross-pollination is excellent because you end up with approaches and ideas that you may not have considered previously or based on your personal work experience. The second thing, I would call it the networking. Networking goes beyond the particular professional knowledge base, etc. And it gives you a much broader perspective to how the market works, gives you new sources of information exchange, etc. And the last thing I would say would be your personal skill set. Like Laurent mentioned, when you meet with different people around the world over the years, are exposed to different cultures, psychologies, business practices, then it vastly improves your skill set for working with people in general, and especially if you're part of a company that works globally.
Thank you, Tuvia. Terry, do you have anything to add?
I'll come on to encouraging young people in a second. First of all, I just want to agree with Tuvia. I think you've got tremendous cross sections of people that you come across. All of them brilliant and from different cultural backgrounds, but also different technical skill sets that you come across, and I find that tremendously motivating. Let me just come to young people a minute. Now, this could be completely wrong because I'm getting pretty ancient now, and when I started out, I must admit I was in awe of the senior people, of the people who acted on a much bigger stage and were competent and so on. Actually, I find young graduates and younger people now full of confidence, totally willing to challenge me about what I thought or what I was doing. But if you think about it, how does a young person get involved when they're starting out? And it might seem a little bit forbidding. Now, I don't know if delegates here are coming from the safety side of things. There's an area in the safety about reporting that in my field certainly is about reporting near misses. So it's an accident might happen, but actually there are lots and lots of near misses. And in the whole safety culture, there's this fabulous area where you're incentivized to report more, not less. So that if you find that people haven't reported near misses, you should be asking why, because they happen all over the place. And so it's encouraging people. Now, you might think, where am I going? I've worked on projects where you encourage people to put their hand up if they don't understand something, if something's not right. And you put it, and you actually ask them, you encourage people to put these questions up, because actually the number of times it comes up with a different way of looking at things, the better. So younger people sometimes are reticent to put their hand up and say, I think this is wrong. I think this interface isn't working. I think there's a mistake in this. And sometimes it might be that actually they haven't actually understood how the standard works. But actually encouraging that and saying, actually, there's nothing wrong with it. If anything, please ask more questions and you'll be rated and you'll get incentivized to ask more questions. So how do we get more people involved? By making it seem a supportive organization where asking dumb questions is actually a good thing.
Thank you, Terry. I like the idea of asking dumb questions. It's something I agree with you. I've always thought it was better to ask than to presume you know and do something wrong. So thank you for that. Really good. Ross, I'm going to give you a slightly different question. But I'd like you to tell me how you think you've benefited or your business has benefited from being a member of Ifan. Microphone.
The wonderful thing about Ifan and what it's done for me personally and my business is that it's kept me in touch with this incredible cohort of people that we've all been talking about. They're brilliant. Some of them are older, some of them are younger. I used to be in the young person program. Now I'm in the older person program, and I did advocate that we should have an older person program. Perhaps, Terry, we could start that. But it's kept me in touch with this industry, and what this industry has done for me personally, and I think, you know, this is why I'd like to see more people get involved, is it's taught me that it's not so much about the technology, it's about how the technology is going to be used. Right? And there's no better way to find out how technology is being used, and is relevant than talking to people who actually use the technology. So, for example, if you're responsible for security of your information systems in the financial services sector, and then you meet that person who says, well, I'm using all these international standards, and guess what? It doesn't work, or I think if we made these modifications, then we can improve them. And that is enormous value. My time at Ifan, and also my very fortunate time, I'm sure Terry experienced this as well, working at the governance level in ISO, is it's users from every single sector that you could possibly imagine. You know, whether it's the motion picture engineering group, moving picture engineering group, I think it is, that's won several Emmy Awards. So that's great recognition from users. To the oil and gas technical committee, Neil Lee from Shell, when he was chairing that. The nuclear industry, the aerospace industry, and of course the finance industry. So it just broadens your outlook, and you can see how sectors are going, how they're developing, how they're improving, how they're innovating, but not just from a single perspective. And you know, I've spent most of my time in finance, and I didn't know anything about standards until back in 1981. The organisation I worked for decided it was going to put together an automatic teller machine network. Now we think nothing about those now. But in those days, you could only use your card at the automatic teller machine that would belong to your bank. Now, of course, we decided that we'd put together a network of 3 banks. So you could go to any one of the banks' ATMs and use the card. And of course, we did that, and that was successful in 1982. And when I look back and think of that first experience in standardization, which was we needed to have a standard card for the 3 banks for a starter. We needed to have interfaces that worked, that were switched, or a switch that would go to both organisations, all 3 organisations. And when I look at where that's developed now, to the smartphone example that I gave before, where I can, you know, simply and easily and securely transact almost anywhere in the world on anything with great degrees of confidence and security. So it's, from a personal perspective, I think the work that I'm involved in and have been involved in is good work. It's good for the world, and there should be more of it.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your final thoughts there. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm chair of the British Standards Society, which is the UK Standards Practice Network. And this does actually provide another way of participating in standardisation, particularly for, as Truvia mentioned, and others, SMEs, where they may find it difficult to participate directly due to having small numbers of employees, for example. So one opportunity is to participate through organisations like BSS and ACANOR in France, and many other standards users groups that there are around the world. BSS is also, and indeed ACANOR, are the national members of Ifan. And Ifan was founded in 1974 at a conference in Paris made up of standards users groups. And the intention there was to be the international voice of standards users. And Ifan has taken on this role and continued it ever since. So there are other opportunities to participate. One other initiative, which I just mentioned quickly, is the IEC Young Professionals Programme, which enables young people to get involved in standardization. And there are many others like this around the world. So it is certainly worth investigating the opportunities to start off participating in standardization in a small way, and then growing and encouraging your company and showing them the benefits of participating in a much more direct way, as has been demonstrated today. And just lastly to say that if your country doesn't have a national standards users group, Ifan does in fact have a very good guide on this. So you can go and have a look at that. So I would like to close by thanking our panelists today, our moderator, Keith Wilson, on the panel, Tuvia Liberman, Laurent Oberle, Terry Hill, and Ross Raitt, and to hope that you will perhaps join us at our next webinar. And in the meantime, more information on Ifan can be found on our website or by contacting us. Again, thank you everybody for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.